I've played quite a few old BioWare RPGs before, with Neverwinter Nights being the game I played the most. Maybe I'll talk about that one day. This was back in a time when BioWare pumped out banger after banger. Neverwinter Nights, KOTOR, Mass Effect, Dragon Age Origins, and of course Baldur's Gate made for an excellent roster of instant classics. When I heard that KOTOR was going to be remade, I wanted to go back and play the original. Once again, I never did. It wasn't until the announcement of Fate of the Old Republic that I finally did. Casey Hudson is back at the helm, and I hope to God his new studio doesn't screw up. Unfortunately, it seems the status of the KOTOR remake is still up in the air, but at least we have the original. Here is the very obvious thing about games from that era. They're old. This means that they might not have some of the resolution options that modern displays have. If you have a monitor with a resolution of 1600 by 1200 or lower, then you'll be fine, at least for KOTOR 1. I haven't played the second one yet, so I don't know about the options there, but I think they're pretty similar. This makes things a little boxy when you have a 1440p widescreen monitor and want to play at that resolution. This isn't a fault of the game, this is a fault of time. It's just old. Luckily, we have the technology to fix this. Mods. So in order to talk about KOTOR, I have to find a way to make it playable in the way that I want. More specifically, a resolution that fits my monitor and makes for a better YouTube video. I have some needs, and I have some wants from the mods. I need 1440p resolution for the sake of the video. I need to keep the rest of the game vanilla in every other aspect. I want uncapped frame rate. I was able to do this with the following mods: a patch for widescreen monitors, a patch for high resolution menus, and a patch for HD UI menus. If you're interested, I'll link to the forum post in the description where I found all this stuff. Follow at your own risk. Following the steps for the mods, you'll be able to play the game at your desired resolution with a pure vanilla experience. However, you'll want to lock the game at 60 FPS for reasons I'll talk about later. It seems that KOTOR runs on the same or a similar rule set to Neverwinter Nights, which is based on Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. Hidden dice rolls, armor classes, etc. It's all done automatically behind the scenes. This ranges from stealth checks to persuasion checks, and of course, combat. So what you get is a combat system where you click the enemy, your character stands in front of them, and they take turns in real time performing actions or other abilities. All of the dice rolls are done behind the scenes and you just watch. You can select abilities and they'll be put into a queue for whenever your character gets their next turn. However, the game knows that just standing there waiting for your turn is boring, so there are animations to pad out the dead space. This keeps the action busy and adds a little flair. Each turn lasts a few seconds, and every person in combat gets a turn just like in a D&D campaign. Think of it along the lines of how early MMOs did their combat, but without the cooldowns. There's no pausing between turns, however, you can pause the game at will with the spacebar. This allows you to queue abilities or strategize a plan. It's a fairly simple system once you see it in action. This doesn't mean the game is easy. Enemies can be tough, and there's no way to respec your character once you make your choice of feats and abilities. You need to know what you want your character to be before you play the game. This doesn't mean that you can't pivot a little and move to something else, but your build won't be as optimal. You need to make sure you know what sorts of weapons you want to use and whether you want to focus on the Force or not before you play. Respecking in KOTOR means starting the game over. I'll talk about the story here in a minute, but I want to go over some of the technical issues I had. Some of these issues were from the mods, some were in the game itself, and some were probably a mixture of the two. Playing the game at an uncapped frame rate created a problem. I had an issue where I would lose control of my character after combat. This didn't happen all the time, but it was often enough that it became a hassle. I could switch to another character and play them just fine. Even my main character would still follow the party around, but I couldn't move the main character. The only way to fix this problem is to reload to a previous save. I could just save the game right where I was, reload from there, and the problem would be fixed, but I might lose control again after the next combat encounter. Since this is a combat heavy game, you can see the problem. This is caused by having an unlocked frame rate. Locking the game to 60 FPS solved the problem. Other annoyances involve the character getting stuck on invisible objects, walls, or simply the other party members. There were numerous times where I would try to walk through a door and get stuck on nothing. This is fixed by simply backing up and trying again. However, I couldn't fix the getting stuck on party members part. They would trap me in corners and lock me in, forcing me to switch characters to simply leave the corner of a room. God forbid I walked down a narrow hallway and wanted to go back the way I came. It's not game breaking, just annoying. I should also mention that there is a solo option that you can select that will only let you move your selected character. The party will stay in place until you turn that mode off. This is supposed to make things easier in certain areas, but I found that it breaks at times. There's a puzzle later in the game that requires you to press buttons on a floor in a certain order. If your party members walk onto the surface, it'll trigger whatever buttons they press. To avoid this, you would need to go into solo mode, leave your party at the door or someplace else, and then complete the puzzle by yourself. In my experience, even if I was in solo mode, the party members would stand in place for a few minutes and then rejoin me, ignoring the solo mode command. I also had a few issues in the later parts of the game where one of my characters simply wouldn't take combat commands. Who that character was did not matter, but it happened a handful of times. I would click on an enemy and sometimes one of the characters would just stand there and do nothing. That's fine if the enemy can be killed easily, but not great in a boss battle when you need all hands on deck. Those were the biggest issues with my playthrough. I played as a soldier named Bubba, and I played through on a mostly light side morality path. This was, back in the day when games had morality systems that let you choose between being a good or bad guy based on your actions. There's not a lot of gray when it comes to some of these decisions, although it does exist. It also doesn't tell you what emotion the line is supposed to convey. Instead, the dialogue options are written well enough that you know exactly what they're supposed to be. I like that. You get to see the full line of dialogue and not have to guess what the character might say based on a synopsis and a symbol. What's cool is that your character will change based on their morality. They'll begin to look all righteous and mighty if you're at peak light side, or more sickly and evil if you're leaning into the dark side. I can't imagine why anyone would remove this type of things from these types of games. Looking at you, Fable Remake. Not everything needs to live in a morally gray area. From here on out, there will be massive spoilers for the story. Don't say I didn't warn you. KOTOR isn't canon to the current Disney Star Wars world. I believe it's listed as a Legends thing, so it's not like this will spoil anything in current canon. That being said, here's the story of KOTOR. Buckle up, it's gonna be a long one. It wouldn't be Star Wars without the Republic finding itself in the middle of some sort of galactic conflict. It's literally in the name of the series, a war amongst the stars. The story of KOTOR has a history that we must first review in order to understand the events of the game. As with all Star Wars, the Republic finds itself in another war. This time it's with the Mandalorians. Two Jedi, Revan and Malak, joined the Republic against the will of the Jedi Council and turned the tides of the war. It was through Revan's strategy that the Republic was able to finally beat the Mandalorians. Afterwards, something happened to the two Jedi. They disappeared, only to return as powerful Sith Lord with an army at their backs. A new war began between the Sith army and the Republic. The Republic lost many people in the turning of Revan and Malak. Defectors and losses in the war put them on the back foot, and they were poised to lose. However, they had a plan. A strike team was formed to take out Revan. Composed of Jedi, the team assaulted Revan's ship. Malak, seeing this, shot the ship to pieces, killing both Revan and the Jedi. This is where our story begins. After character creation, I woke to the sounds of explosions and blaster fire. Our ship had been attacked by the Sith above the planet Taurus, or Terrace, depending on who you ask.
We're in an abandoned apartment on the planet of Terrace.
I'm programmed to encourage you to enjoy your stay on Taurus.
Taurus used to be a nice place before the Sith showed up and started bossing us around.
You mean you don't have a plan to get off Taurus yet?
The scorched hallways clanged with the din of battle. Blaster bolts flew through the air and sang around my character. I know I probably shouldn't have used grenades on a ship in space, but I couldn't help myself. My blaster shots aimed true, almost like I'd done this before. I'm told to find Carth Onasi, the commanding officer of the Endar Spire, our soon-to-be doomed ship. He would know how to escape. Carth was waiting for me. He had prepared an escape pod for our evacuation together. Carth had an intense distrust of my character that stemmed from his own personal trauma and betrayals, something I would learn about in time. KOTOR has a relationship system. At times, your companions may wish to speak to you because they have something to say. Usually, this means that they want to continue their personal story. It's up to you whether you want to listen to them or not, but I believe each character has one of these stories. This is something that BioWare expands on in other games turning them into full-on romance systems in later titles. Here, it's a lot more tame. We won't see any sexual scenes, but there is the ability to confess your love to at least one character based on your character's gender. For me, it was Bastila. Bastila was a brilliant Jedi who had been on the Endar Spire right before the attack. She escaped right before I did and had landed on Taurus. All I knew about Bastila was that she had been instrumental in the death of Darth Revan.
You cannot win, Revan.
One of her force powers is the use of something called the battle meditation. For her, she was able to project the meditation outward into a vastly large area, winning her allies many battles. But for now, we needed to find her on Taurus. Taurus was kind of like Coruscant. It's a whole planet made up of nothing but a city. Ecumenopolis is the word for this, if you were wondering. Things I never would have known if I weren't writing a script for this video. Like many Ecumenopolises, Cumenopoli? I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, the rich and powerful live high in the clouds, with the occupants becoming poorer and poorer the closer they are to the ground. Through talking to the locals, we learned that Bastila had been taken as a prisoner and sold into slavery. But we had a plan to get her back. There's a lot that happens on Taurus. It's one of the longer sections of the game, so I'll condense it. Finding Bastila and leaving the planet involves settling a gang war, making friends with a Twi'lek and Wookiee named Mission and Zalbar, adding a droid and a Mandalorian to the party, infiltrating a Sith base for launch codes, and then destroying an entire smuggling crime syndicate. During all of this, Darth Malak became angry that Bastila still hadn't been killed or captured, so he assaulted the planet in order to destroy it. All of that planning paid off. We were able to save Bastila. Killing the leader of the smuggling syndicate gave us access to a lovely ship called the Ebon Hawk. This ship becomes the central hub for all of the future relationship systems and home for the characters that I didn't choose for my party. The next stop was a planet called Dantooine. It was a relatively simple plains planet where settlers had gone to set up homes. The Jedi also had an enclave there where they presided over the local issues. During my adventures on Taurus, I began to have visions about Revan and Malak. Bastila was also having the same visions, and through that connection, recognized my latent talent in the Force. She thought it would be wise to train me at the Enclave and make me a Padawan, which is why we went to Dantooine. So that's what happened next. I showed up, trained, got a lightsaber, chose a color, and got to choose what type of Jedi I was. My final mission for training was simple, or so I thought. A dark taint had crept into the land and was corrupting it. We were tasked with rooting it out and dealing with that darkness however we saw fit. What I found was a Jedi named Juhani who had fallen to the dark side. If I could turn her back to the light, she'd join my party. I was able to convince her to return to the Enclave and seek forgiveness. Doing this allowed me to use her in my party, which I then never did because her model creeped me out. Success was greeted with another more important task. The Jedi knew that Revan and Malak had been searching for something on Dantooine back before they fell to the dark side. There was an ancient ruin on Dantooine, and they wanted me to investigate. This ruin held a piece of a partial star map to something called the Star Forge. No, not that Star Forge. This Star Forge is something that no one seemed to know anything about. The discovery of the Star Forge was the sort of turning point for Revan and Malak, and their beginning descent to the dark side. As such, the Jedi Council knew nothing of how the Star Forge functioned. They only really knew that it was a source of evil and great computing power. Okay, I'll stop. Sorry. The piece of the map that I found pointed to the location of the other map pieces. This shifted my investigation into a fetch mission for the Jedi. Find the rest of the map and put it together. The map pointed me to multiple planets: Kashyyyk, Korriban, Manan, and Tatooine. It wouldn't be Star Wars without Tatooine, right? The game then opens up to allow me to visit any of these planets in any order. Every time I visited a new planet, a new vision of Revan and Malak appeared. This was then followed by the piece of the Starforge map. Every planet has its set of main and side quests. quests. Each world is made up of a handful of maps that can be explored, but it's nothing that's super expansive. We're talking about an original Xbox game here, so it's not like there was a ton they could really stuff on that disc. However, I'm still surprised at the size of the game. There's a lot to do, and the maps are still fairly large. Even with its small 3.5 gigabyte size, which is totally adequate, and some people might think it's too big, it still took me 40 hours to complete the game. I went to Kashyyyk next, where I started a Wookiee rebellion, then on to Manaan, where I stopped a Sith plot to take over the planet. After that, I went to Tatooine, where I killed a crate dragon. Each of these worlds held a piece of the star map in some sort of ancient ruins. I enjoyed every one of the main stories, but I think that Manaan was my least favorite of them all. It had a more unique mechanic of forcing me to become an investigator and then bring that evidence to a court for a court hearing. It's a good mission, don't get me wrong, and I actually did really enjoy it. I'm just saying that out of all the missions, it was my least favorite. However, after leaving Tatooine, something happened. Malik had had enough. His army had finally caught up to my crew, and they used a tractor beam to pull my ship into theirs. Before I was captured, I needed to make a decision on who should try to get themselves thrown into solitary confinement. That person would try to make things as difficult as possible for the Sith in hopes of being separated and imprisoned. There, they would try to make an escape and free the rest of the crew. I chose Mission for the job since she could open most any door and could stealth easily. Those of us that weren't separated were tortured. Pain rippled through us, brought on by the hands of the man who betrayed Karth. Saul Kareth was a Republic admiral who Karth held in very high regard. When Saul turned coat and joined with Revan and the Sith, it broke Karth. Not only had such a great man fallen to the dark side of the Force, but this same man had destroyed Karth's home world. Karth's wife and son were there. Or were they? That's a story you'll have to explore. Either way, Karth wanted revenge. Malik was not on the ship at the moment. Leave a message at the sound of the beep. So we needed to act quickly in order to get off the ship. The plan worked. Mission was separated, escaped, and freed everyone. However, we quickly learned that Malik was currently on his way back, and we needed to leave before he arrived. This required going to the bridge of the ship, which ended in a confrontation with Saul. With Saul's dying breath, he relayed something to Karth that I couldn't hear, something that would change Karth. Time was up. We had to leave. Malik was there, and we could sense it. At the end of the hall, a set of blast doors hissed open. Out of the crimson darkness strode an imposing figure of absolute evil, Darth Malik. Malik addressed my character with a few questions that I found to be very odd. It's here that we learned the secret of KOTOR.
The Jedi do not believe in killing their prisoners. No one deserves execution, no matter what their crimes.
The Council would not normally accept an adult for training, but this is a special case.
They say the Force can do terrible things to a mind. It can wipe away your memories and destroy your very identity.
Tatooine. Kashyyyk. Manaan. Korriban. Revan visited each of these worlds searching for clues to reveal the hidden location of the Starforge.
The lure of the dark side is difficult to resist. I fear this quest to find the Starforge could lead you down an all too familiar path.
What greater weapon is there than to turn an enemy to your cause, to use their own knowledge against them?
I am Revan. Now, I'll admit, I knew this going into the game. It's an old enough game now that I've had the twist spoiled for me many times over. However, the game still surprised me. One of the things I constantly asked while playing was, how come no one recognizes me as Revan? Turns out, they did. The game answers that question. Revan constantly wore a mask, but not always, and the Jedi on Dantooine, including Bastila, knew who I was all along. They acted like they didn't know, in order to get me to go after the star map. The point was to make me fight against the Sith and lead the Jedi to the Star Forge. They hoped that I would destroy it this time. I think there's also a little bit of hope that I could be redeemed and brought back to the light side. So while I knew what the twist was, I was pleasantly surprised to see that level of detail when it came to answering my lingering questions. Malak pounced on this information. The game wants you to feel used and tricked by the Jedi, and Malak tried to push me to the dark side by using this information against me. It almost worked. They used me, manipulated me. I was tempted to go back to the dark side because of the trickery. Why not? I could just retake my mantle as Sith Lord and teach them all a lesson. However, I stayed the course and kept with the light. Star Wars has always had redemption as one of its core themes. No one is too far gone unless they choose to be. Vader having a last-minute change of heart is an iconic character arc. Even the sequel trilogy tried to copy this with Kylo Ren because it's so effective. I'm not saying the sequel movies were good, but even Disney recognized that theme. The game explores this same theme earlier with Juhani coming back to the light, if you save her, and even with Bastila later on. After this revelation, I fought Malak, and he turned out to be a bit of a pushover actually. I beat him easily, but Bastila jumped into the fight and told me to leave. She had sacrificed herself to save the rest of the crew. I bid a quick farewell and took Karth to the hangar in order to find the ship and crew. Our mission was the same. Bastila was gone, but we still had to press on with stopping Malak and finding the Star Forge. After a brief discussion about who I was, I reassured everyone that I wouldn't turn evil again. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? The next stop was Korriban, a Sith homeworld with, you guessed it, more ancient ruins that hold a piece of the star map. Okay. I was tasked with entering a Sith academy that would eventually lead to the ruins. This questline is interesting because you get to see some of the inner workings of the Sith and how they actually train their acolytes. The map on Korriban was the final piece of the Star Forge puzzle, and with that, we set off to a new star system. Upon entering the system, the ship lost power. A disruptor field on a nearby planet had been activated, and we crash landed on a beach. This would have to be dealt with swiftly because the Republic fleet was on the way. I thought the alien race that lived on this planet was pretty interesting. I'll let you look them up if you want. They're called the Rakata, but I'm going to skip their story for brevity. Suffice it to say, I got access to more ancient ruins. In these ruins, there were Sith, Dark Jedi, and at the top, an evil Bastila. During her time away from our crew, Malak tortured her and warped her mind. She'd not been nearly as strong as she thought and gave in to the dark side. Lightsabers drawn, we clashed. Two great Force users battling not just for our lives, but for our souls. Bastila was bent on having me turn back to the dark side, but she wouldn't be successful.
Be gone, thought!
So we dropped the disruptor field and went to the Star Forge. The Star Forge was exactly what it sounded like. It was a massive space station and shipyard that created ships, droids, and weapons. However, the Star Forge used dark side energy to fuel its production. This is how Revan and Malak made their fleet. Now that he had Bastila at his side, Malak could use her battle meditation to keep the Republic at bay. My team was the only one that could make its way through the blockade without too many issues. Once I got onto the Star Forge, I fought through hordes of enemy Sith soldiers and Dark Jedi until I faced Bastila again. Depending on what stories you finish and how you work your character, you can try and turn her back to the light side. I was able to do this, and she agreed to help the Republic fleet by refocusing her battle meditation. Now only one bad guy remained. Malak. This version of Malak was no joke compared to the version I fought before. He was faster, stronger, and hit like a tank. Earlier in the game, I was told that Dantooine was attacked by the Sith and destroyed. Malak had captured some Jedi from Dantooine and used their corpses as a way to heal during the battle. So the boss fight was part fighting and destroying corpses to keep him from healing, and then also fighting Malak. Defeating Malak stopped the Sith, and the Republic was able to break through and destroy the Star Starforge. We made it out successfully and were awarded with medals for our bravery. The end. The story is fairly straightforward, and like I said, even though I knew the twist, I'm still pleasantly surprised with how they told it and tied up what I thought were loose ends. The characters are pretty good for the most part. Each of them had some sort of complex backstory that eventually explained how they got to where they were. If you spent enough time with them, you'd find out they had quite a lot of depth and motivation. This really helped when I eventually came across those storylines and their eventual conclusions. I enjoyed helping Karth finally find some closure, and I'm glad that Bastila was able to reconcile with her mother to some degree. These are just a few of the stories. I had a great time playing KOTOR. It had its levels of jank, that's for sure, but it was a good experience. The only real criticism that I have is that I don't think that many of the weapons or armors look all that great. They're fine enough, sure, but nothing really stood out for me. I guess it's fine because the game doesn't really go super kooky with its design and keeps aesthetics true to the Star Wars world. I would have liked to have seen some crazy looking stuff though. Two of the best lightsaber colors are basically a red-orange color and then a cyan color, which is nice, but that's kind of the weirdest that the lightsabers get. While I can get a purple saber, the two I mentioned had effects that changed the stats of anything I attached to them. They were simply better. None of the ranged weapons really did anything for me in terms of the way they looked. The armor was okay, but once again, nothing that really popped out in a way that made me go, oh dang, that's legendary. You'd find a piece of gear that had some good stats for your build, and it's just kind of alright looking. Once again, mods come to the rescue, and while you can get Revan's robes at the end of the game, you can't wear his mask or his cloak. And for those people looking to rock the full look, you'll need mods for that. I know that this style of combat may not be for everyone, but if you're familiar with early MMOs, you'll adapt to it pretty well. I think there's definitely enough build crafting here to make a character that works for any type of build, but make sure you know what you want to build before you do it. There's definitely a reason to replay the story in case you want to choose the other morality path. Like I said, I played as a light side good guy character, and if I play again, I'd play a dark side character. This game to me truly encapsulates Golden Age BioWare, and I would love to play some of their other games from this era on the channel. I'd most likely start with KOTOR 2, however, that's a video for another time. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments down below. Just like Star Wars has the theme of redemption, I believe that redemption is possible in the real world as well. BioWare holds all the power to redeem themselves in the eyes of the players, but they have to choose to do it. So that's KOTOR in 2026. Does it hold up? Surprisingly, yes. It works just fine without the mods if that's the way you want to go. Thank you all so much for watching. I know it's been a minute since I put out a video, but I intend to do a lot more on this channel in the future, so stay tuned. I'll see you all next time. BubbaTV24 signing out.